Hey there, it's CJ. I'm the coach who loves working with people getting out of long-term relationships and embracing their sexuality. And I really love the topic of exploring, but also how do you stay whole in that process? How do you stay safe? What are some things that you may not know about? Or anticipate, and how do we, as we're exploring, how do we just keep ourselves feeling good and safe? So next week I am teaching for the Integrative Sex Therapy Institute, and I will have an audience of therapists and coaches, and I am going to be doing my workshop on kink and BDSM. And I want to sort of take it out of the realm of community, BDSM communities, kink communities, and dungeons. And I want to place it in the context of dating and people exploring. And as coaches and therapists, how can they help people who are exploring and who may not have anyone to talk to, who may have some shame around their own explorations? And this even goes beyond kinky things, right? It could be like just any dating experience in general. As a person getting out of a long-term relationship who may not have a lot of experience, what are some of the things that I can impart to other people in this industry so that they're aware of it, really. I wasn't a person who was super comfortable because I just didn't know a lot, so I didn't have necessarily the words for what I was doing when I began my dating journey, 13 years ago, post-divorce. And looking back, I'm really sure, like I even still have this today, there's probably some embarrassment and some degree of shame around doing something outside of the box of, normativity, whatever that is anymore, really. But 13 years ago, let me tell you, people were not talking about this stuff in the same way that they are today. At least I didn't realize that we had access to resources until a few years into my journey. So I'm here today to ask you a question. This is next week, so if you watch this recording later, just send me a message, because this is going to be an ongoing thing that I'm really curious about. What is something that you want to tell a therapist or a coach about yourself, or about an experience that you had that maybe was not a good experience, but you're struggling to share it? What is going on here? What's the number one thing holding you back from having that conversation with a therapist or with a coach? How can we as providers serve you better in that area? My own experience is trusting that the therapist or coach isn't going to judge me. And that takes a while to build up, right? So is there some specific thing that can be done to create an environment that is more conducive to sharing sexual experiences, embarrassing experiences? It's kind of taken me down a rabbit hole, and I'm going to tell you a story right now about not therapy, but in the broader medical field, and seeing doctors, how difficult it is, even after 13 years of exploration and having the words now and having the like seeing where the holes are in my own healthcare and trying to share that with doctors. And today I had that experience. I had some questions around, testing, STI testing, and all the different parts of the body. And I was at an ENT and I was talking to him about it. His attitude was like, well, I don't do STI testing. And it was just sort of like, well, though, that people aren't only having P and V sexual relations, right? There seems to be an assumption still in the medical community that that's all that we, count as sex. And clearly that's never been the case, but it's like almost like the medical community really hasn't caught up with it, except in very specific areas. People who are providers to certain communities or who do like testing clinics and stuff like that. But like I have been bringing this up repeatedly in my health journey, trying to take care of myself as a 57-year-old woman trying to navigate, the insurance, number one, but also number two, just having open, frank, shame-free conversations with providers so they know how to help me. And it does translate into the mental health providers as well. If we're going to therapy for particular things, maybe there's trauma. Maybe there isn't trauma. Maybe there's trauma that we're not even aware of. But a lot of that trauma for many of us occurs in sexual experiences, whether consensual or non-consensual. And there is so much secrecy and so much shame and so many walls put up. And I want therapists to understand from my perspective what it's like, but also from your perspective. So I'm welcoming conversation. I'm welcoming DMs. I want to hear from you. I want to hear, like, if you could tell a therapist something anonymously or how to do their job better, because I think that's really what this comes down to. How do they do their jobs better to serve people who are sexually curious, kink curious, who are doing things like maybe they're practicing non-monogamy? That's largely my issue with medical providers. It's like, look, this is what I do, and I'm telling you so you can help give me better healthcare, right? And I'm very assertive, and I can advocate for myself in that space, and it's exhausting. It was really like not a pleasant experience for me to have to share that today. There were also 2 other people in the room who were assistants taking notes, and I said, I almost didn't say anything, but I was like, you know what? I need to have this conversation. And I did get a piece of information that was like, oh yeah, I probably should do this thing, right? So it was helpful, but it was also like, I feel like I'm always educating providers. And when I'm just there for my own healthcare, that's not particularly fun. So I'm going to be educating providers on the area of BDSM and kink through the lens of like people going out there, either opening up their relationships or they're out of relationships and they're dating and they're freelancing, they're on their own. Like when you start venturing into alternative types of relationship styles or sexual explorations, it's harder and harder to share that even with people that you're like really close with who know everything about you. It's kind of like the third rail, right? Like people can have very negative reactions, and it can be a very painful experience to share for some of us. Not always, but I've lost a couple friends along the way, and because they just don't want to hear it, or they make assumptions about what it means. So I'm just asking you, if you were to tell a therapist something about your own experience or how they could do their job better, send it to me. You know what? I'm totally open to you sharing a story like in an audio file or something like that. I want to hear, or maybe it's even just like an experience that you had on a date. Like, I'm really going back in my past and realizing how many experiences at the time I did not necessarily recognize were assault, and they were. Now I see that as very clearly someone crossed a boundary when I said stop, and they continued, and that is assault. And, you know, do I feel like I need a lot of therapy around that? Not necessarily. But it also was not anything that I think I ever brought up with a therapist, which is interesting. You know, I just don't want people, women in particular, to feel like they're alone on this journey, right? Because we're also like protecting ourselves. Like, we're doing these risky things, or we are curious and we're excited and we want to connect because maybe our relationship or our past relationship didn't have those things or didn't have that connection. So we're craving the connection. And there's like a wicked cocktail of all these things coming together where it's like a real desire to have it like really amazing, sexy experiences and connection, and maybe even the promise of a relationship in the future. And we're a little bit like shy or embarrassed about that, or we don't want to say it to other people for whatever reason. I mean, I think that's also how people get involved with like narcissists. You know, it's like you end up isolating yourself, or they isolate you from the people who care about you or the people who can help take care of you. So I think that's actually a really good sort of analogy. It's like you're almost like isolating yourself, like a narcissist would isolate you, or an abuser would isolate you from friends and family. And that's probably because of shame. It's probably because there's an embarrassment there. There's something like you don't, or there's a lack of trust in that like therapeutic relationship. And you may end up suffering in silence, right? Or you may not have, if there's, you know, a bad experience, who are you going to go to? Then you have to tell the whole story. And there needs to be the trust of like, yeah, I was engaging in behavior that I consented to as a person who was curious or who wanted to experiment with rough sex or something like that. But then it, you know, like help me tease out like what occurred, or how do I communicate that with someone without inviting what I'm not inviting. You know, really, like I want to sample things, I want to try things, and yet it doesn't mean that I'm open to everything, but I may not know what the thing is that begins to occur that I need to say stop to. I know that's getting a little bit like convoluted, but I hope this is clear. I'm asking you, share with me any experience that I can impart to therapists and coaches about feeling good and held and safe and not judged in that therapeutic relationship or coaching relationship, so that we could better serve you. what is an experience that you want us to know about that we may not know about? And there's probably so many things. I mean, this is a 3-hour class. Like, I'm not going into all the nitty-gritty. But if I could have a couple of shares, anonymously, of course, like, let me know if it's okay to share your story, because I think sometimes that's how we really illustrate, like, you maybe don't know that this is what people are doing or what I'm doing, and I wish you knew this so that you could better help me. I hope that's all making sense. I'm really excited about teaching this class, and I'm really excited about having more of these conversations and really helping serve women in particular who are going through a reclaiming of their sexual selves. And it can sound like, well, I'm going to go out and experience pleasure, and I'm in search of pleasure in my sexual expression. Yet there are some things that I've learned in my journey that I wish I knew, that I wish I hadn't. I had people in my corner who had a better understanding. And it's kind of like a support team, right? It's a team to help you. And the main person on that team is yourself. Like, what are some ways that I can care for myself on this journey, but also, like, what am I going to do when shit gets weird? Or if I have an assault experience like I did, or, who's going to be there who can know the full story, the full me, and this is what I'm doing, and how do I stay safe on this journey? That's really what I'm starting to create here. I have so many interests, and I'm really just trying to, distill down my own personal experiences and what I wish I had. And I wish I had people who, sure, I'm a kinky person. I didn't know that when I started out. And there are a lot of resources. I live in an area where there's tons of resources within the kink and BDSM communities. And that doesn't always speak to me. There's classes and things like that. Like, going beyond that, support for the type of person who is exploring, not necessarily in public in a dungeon, but who is sort of coupling that up with dating. And, sometimes hookups, or, just getting to know someone and having a scene. So how can I sort of combine those things and create a supportive community for those of us doing that? If you have any recommendations on that, I'd love to hear them too. Anyway, it was great to have this conversation with you. Reach out. I'd love to hear any input that you have. I'll see you later.